Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. How is everybody tonight? Can y'all hear me okay? Just nod. Okay, awesome. I put a couple of messages in the chat room. First, just to tell you I was going to start here in just a second, but also I think I got everything graded that had been submitted by 4:15 today. So hopefully you're seeing your grades, but if for some reason you're not, just let me know. I've had some weird kind of Moodle glitches going on, and I know the universities had some issues with it here lately too. So some things that I thought had already been posted and graded weren't in there, so I went in and reposted them again. But if something's missing, just let me know, and I'll be glad to go back and look at it and get it in there, because as far as I can tell, we're caught up, or at least I am for now. So tonight I'm going to spend about 15 minutes just talking with you guys about specifically professional learning communities and the steps that you have to follow to be able to create one. And then I wanted to leave some time just for any questions or comments and concerns you have. As you know, I've opened up all of the modules to finish out the course, so hopefully you guys are rocking through that. The submissions that I've had already, even through the final exam, have been excellent. So, you know, I'm sure that everyone's going to do just fine on them, and we'll walk away with some pretty good grades. But in terms of professional learning communities for tonight, you know, I really want you to think about a couple of things. Number one, when you're working with a group, what would you say are the differences between discussion and discourse? Why would we make that distinction? Thoughts or ideas? Yeah, so what would be, why would we want to distinguish between discussion versus discourse when we're talking about a professional learning community?
I'll answer, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
I guess more in a discussion, you're actually coming to a conclusion. With the discourse, it usually just turns into a big argument, and you don't end up with a solution at the ending.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good distinction. Other ideas or thoughts? Well, I know one of the things that comes to mind for me, much like Brandon said it there, when you talk about discussion, it's really about problem solving and coming to a conclusion. I think discourse is more kind of what I'm doing to you tonight, which is talking to you, and it's not a two-way or reciprocal process. One of the critical things that I want you to be thinking about in terms of professional learning communities is the fact that we need to have a two-way communication. It can't just be someone coming in and lecturing or giving lots of information. It really should be all around that true discussion, collaboration, cooperation, and hopefully reaching a consensus type agreement. So we know that the most effective professional learning communities have norms about how they operate. So that's probably the first and most critical step. Secondly, there should be a shared common vision. And as we've talked about before, that vision and mission should be developed early on in a professional learning community. And it should also be something that is developed cooperatively with input from all stakeholders. You know, we've talked a lot about, too, the culture within our schools, our classrooms, but there is also a culture that has to exist in a professional learning community. And the way that that culture begins to be established is through the development of norms, as well as sharing that common mission and vision, and knowing what it is that you're there to accomplish, what you're going to focus on, and how you're going to go about doing the work. There also has to be an inquiry-based perspective when you go into that. You know, professional learning communities should not be front-loaded, I guess, for lack of a better term. With someone who has all the answers. It really should be about asking lots of good questions and everybody really thinking about those questions and finding solutions. It should be very results oriented. There should be very specific and spelled out outcomes. Without those, you know, it's sort of like you're on a road trip, but you don't have a destination in mind. An effective PLC has a distinct and defined destination. There also has to be action. You know, I've been in professional learning communities where everybody just talked and we never actually did anything. That's a waste of your time as well as everybody else in there. So we want to make sure that we are doing, planning, and implementing actions. And of course, there has to be mutual support as well as mutual trust. So those are critical elements to an effective PLC, and without them, you can spend a lot of time and energy and really not have the best results. So how do you go about establishing a professional learning community? Well, as one of your projects, I'm asking you to put together a PLC plan. So where do you start? Well, the first thing that you need to do is spend some time in that pre-planning stage. Think about who should be a part of that professional learning community. What is it that you need to focus on and prepare and plan for? What are the outcomes or results that you're expecting to get? And then how are you going to go about doing it? So in your plan that I'm asking you to do as part of your assignment, you're going to have to think about what are those first pre-planning steps. What are the things you need to do before you even sit down with everybody else in the group? And that is very important. It's just like we know as teachers, you need to do lesson planning and all of that before you even walk in the classroom. So it's sort of that lesson plan for an effective PLC. After you reach those conclusions and you begin to think about that first meeting, I would encourage you in the first meeting to do some norm setting and to also do some team building. I know it may seem like fluff to some people, but whether you use those assessments that I've shared with you, or you have other team building ideas and activities, spending time getting your team to know each other, to recognize each other's strengths as well as their differences, but also to know them on a human level will go a long way to building that foundation of relational trust. Also in that first meeting, I would do some planning ahead with the group. So not only are you establishing norms, you're spending time getting to know each other, you would also want to lay out a map of where it is you want to head. So that's the beginning of setting those goals and objectives for the team. Then in your second and possibly third meetings, I would spend some time developing specific goals and outcomes. So if this is a PLC that's going to meet for a semester or for a school year, what is it that you want to accomplish by the end? And it can't be just your set outcomes. You may have a set of outcomes from your principals or your administrators or central office, but you have to take those even and fine-tune them to meet the needs of your particular group and the students that you serve. Getting buy-in and input from everybody is critically important in doing so. I would also suggest that you use that SMART goals template. SMART goals are very, very effective, and they will keep you on track in terms of that goal setting. After you've got your goals set, then you can actually begin digging into the work. So let's say, for example, one of your SMART goals is that you want to raise math achievement in third grade by 10 percentage points within the first semester. So how do you go about accomplishing that? Well, this is where data analysis becomes critical. So you need to look at not only the historical data that you have to see where your kids were and where they're coming from, but you also need to begin to collect formative assessment. Now, in an ideal world, if you don't have a formative assessment plan in place, you may need to use one of those PLC meetings to establish a formative assessment plan. Formative assessments are most effective when they're written with other people and they are vetted through a group of individuals as opposed to someone doing it as a solo act. So if you don't have a formative assessment plan, I would spend some time at this point in a PLC developing those formative assessments. And again, that's going to be based on your objectives, your curriculum, your expectations for state testing, etc. But let's assume you've got a great common assessment plan already going, so you might want to look at that formative assessment data to begin to track and plan on how you're going to address those things that are strengths as well as those areas that maybe need some additional support. Using that data, you can then move into really that strong piece of curriculum alignment. And remember, I've talked to you guys several times about that CIA triad, that curriculum, instruction, and assessment have to exist together. You cannot do one of them without the other two. They have to also be very much in alignment. So let's assume that your formative assessment as well as your historical data shows that your kids need more time and work on literacy, and specifically the skills of summarizing and drawing conclusions. Those are pretty much standard objectives everybody needs to work on. So not only is our data telling us that, I would then delve into the curriculum and find and focus on those objectives that have to do with those particular skills. Spend time unpacking those standards, you've done that already, and using some of those tools and templates so that you have a really clear understanding of what those standards are asking you to do. So now we've not only addressed the assessment piece of the triad, we are also beginning to look at the curricular piece. In addition to unpacking those standards, I would look at either my school's curricula or my districts or even the states to get some ideas on how to best and most effectively teach that. After you've done those elements through your PLCs, you then need to begin to plan for and implement quality instruction. When you're doing the instructional piece of this, you might want to look at how you group your students, which students need enrichment, which students need remediation, which students need reinforcement. But most importantly, you also want to use each other's brains, literally, to plan the most effective instruction you can and rely on those research-based best practices. Once you've done that, you know, it'd be nice if it were all done, but that is actually a cycle. That's what should be happening then continuously throughout the rest of the year for your professional learning communities. The other thing, though, that I would throw in is make sure that you're doing some mid-course checks and adjustments so that you know that you're on the right track. So let's say you go through that entire cycle and you've analyzed the data, you've looked at the curriculum, you've used that to plan effective instruction. So then you do your assessments and you look at the data. Well, it either worked, guys, or it didn't. If it worked, great, then continue to move forward with the same process. If it didn't, then you need to dig a little bit deeper into your data to determine, are there specific students who need additional help and support, and they might need that even outside the normal classroom time. So you have to always be thinking about how this all ties together and how you use the data and information to plan for effective instruction, both at the class level, the group level, but also at the individual student level. The other thing that strong professional learning communities do is they self-assess as well. So somewhere along the way, and you know, I typically recommend about every 4 to 6 weeks, you just do sort of a temperature check. Is everyone coming to the table with the right information? Is everyone doing the pre-work that's needed to make this an effective and an efficient meeting? Are we accomplishing the goals and things that we set out to? Because if you don't take a time to look at yourselves and how well you're doing, then we know that there can be some problems. The other thing I want to remind you too is it's pretty simple what you need to do when you're in that professional learning community if you follow the works of Dufour and others. 4 critical questions. What should students know and be able to do? How are we going to know whether or not they did it? How are we going to assess and monitor it? And finally, how do we respond when they don't get it? So very simple. It's not, you know, it's not a complicated process, but I promise you, if you follow that and you really are doing those elements and pieces that address those questions and you take it into full implementation, I can almost guarantee you you're going to see really great results from your students. In reading some of the assignments and stuff too, I was really impressed with some of the activities that you guys are doing through your PLCs to benchmark and look at your kids as well as group them. There's a million different ways to do this. There's not just one right way. But if you follow those basic principles, I promise you that, like I said, it really, really will truly work. The other thing I want to remind you about as well, that there has to be support structures for PLCs. So while we can spend some time talking about the nitty-gritty pieces in terms of step 1, you do this, step 2, you do that, you also cannot ignore that there has to be structure in place for this to happen. And it may seem kind of silly, but honestly, you have to make sure that there's time to meet. I'm often amazed at how many schools say, we're going to do professional learning communities, but they never have the time. It's not built into their schedule. It's not built into their calendar or their plans. You have to make an overt effort to meet. I know when I was a high school principal, I was big on calendars. I did the entire calendar for the year. We usually did that in May the previous school year, so we were ready to go. But we had a cycle. So we knew that every first Monday, this type of PLC met. Every Tuesday, this type of PLC met, etc. So that structure was really important. And it was a no excuses mindset for us. If you were in a PLC and your PLC met on Tuesdays, if you had a doctor's appointment or something, you better not schedule it on a Tuesday, because we told you literally a year in advance that this was the expectation. The other part of it too is you have to make sure that time is sacred, so that you're only talking about instruction and student learning, curriculum, and data. A lot of people will try to usurp that time and take it away from you, and you cannot let them do that. So much so that I know we had two kinds of professional learning community meetings. We had one that we called our curriculum instruction meetings. Those were SILT, our curriculum instructional team meetings, where we only talked about instruction. Then we had a separate kind of meeting that was nothing but operations, because sometimes you got to pay attention to that as well. But making sure that it's sacred is really, really important. You also have to make sure there's communication structures in place, and that's why the norms are so important to you. If your norm is that everybody's going to have a chance to give input and feedback, then you have to live up to that and follow it. If there's not strong communication structures, then we know what can happen. Either nobody responds, or everybody responds, or you have one person who monopolizes the entire time, and you don't meet those goals and objectives. There also has to be resources available. It's not okay if you're going to be looking at formative assessment for people to come to the meeting without their data results. If part of what you're looking at in terms of your data is analyzing student work, people have to come to the table prepared. If they fail to do so, then again, you're losing that great opportunity. And I can't emphasize enough that there has to be respect and trust. And unfortunately, that's probably the hardest piece to getting a successful PLC going, is to make sure that happens. But again, when you're focused on the work, it's purposeful and objective and goal-driven, you'll find that that respect begins to happen much more quickly than not. The other thing that you want to make sure too is that there is ways that you expect people to collaborate. And if you're in a leadership position, it's especially critical, but even if you're not, you can also still use those collaboration tools that are going to help to drive this. So one of them is that if you ask a question, it sounds silly, but make sure you pause and give people a chance to respond. It's that good old wait time we talk about in the classroom. And we might do that really well with our students, but sometimes we forget to do that with our adults. People need time to process, they need time to think, and they need time to reflect. And one of the ways you can tell if people really are engaged in doing that is, most people, when they're thinking, they will either look upward or they will look downward, but they won't continue to look straight forward. So pay attention, and if you see the people in your group are doing one of those body language signals, give them the time. Silence can be scary, but it also is essential and important, particularly for adult learners. Also, don't be afraid to paraphrase. So if someone's starting to say something, or they go through and they're sharing, and you want to make sure that you, paraphrase what they said for the whole group so that it's clear there's no misunderstanding. Sometimes, too, you're going to have to ask probing questions. I know you guys have never had this experience that I've had, but I had teachers who would get way off track, and they would tell us so much background information, we weren't sure what the root of the question or the root of their story was. So we had to really ask more probing questions to get them to move and to define specifically what it was they were talking about. You also have to create conditions where everyone's willing to put their ideas on the table. We're all probably familiar with brainstorming, but sticky notes were just a big, huge part of our PLCs. because every time we asked a question or something like that, everybody had to write a response on a sticky note, and we would then post it around the room so everybody could see it. That's one way to assure that everybody is putting their ideas out there. Also, it may seem very basic, but you would be amazed how often we forget to pay attention and to be that really strong, active listener. So you have to do that as well. Also, too, we all have our personal opinions about team members and others that we work with, but start out at least with presuming positive attributes and positive attention. People want the same things, guys. We all want our students to be successful, and remember, that's really what it's about. Also, make sure you maintain balance within it. Like I said earlier, don't let one person, monopolize the conversation. Don't make, and move on with it along that way. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say about these. I think that's pretty much what we wanted to talk about tonight. In the PowerPoint presentation that I sent to you guys, there are some specific sort of hints that can help you with how to make collaboration happen. I know we used this, like I said, when I was leading professional learning communities as both a principal and as assistant superintendent. We actually put those on cardstock, each one of them, and posted them around the room. And they were nice reminders for us because we had a team, we called it the war room. It was our team meeting room, and it's where all of our meetings took place. But to have those visual reminders was really, really helpful. I'm trying to read what everybody's saying too. Okay, so with that being said, what are your thoughts, questions, comments, concerns?
Tracy, I had some questions about once you establish that your students have needs and they're struggling in a particular area, how do you go about doing that RTI? Like, what does that RTI look like, or how does that look like? I don't understand really, I can't wrap my mind around how to do that,
Yeah, if I can find it, I have a wonderful RTI sort of model, but I'll do my best to give it to you verbally. If you think about, how you always see the RTI model as a pyramid, right? Well, I actually like the pyramid, I'm not sure I can do this, to be inverted. So that the top layer where the most of your students fall, that part of the RTI model is what I call good first instruction. We have to make sure, and that's where our PLCs come in, that we are providing the best instruction initially that we possibly can. Because the better job we do in that tier 1 with good first instruction, the fewer students are going to fall into tier 2 and tier 3. The other part of it is too that not only do you want to make sure you have great first instruction, but I actually add a layer above that. And I think we talked about this before, the enrichment piece for our gifted and talented students. Because if we don't pay attention to them, we tend to dumb them down to average. We're pretty good about pulling the low kids up, but we also forget that sometimes we're pulling down our most gifted and talented. When you look at tier 2 instruction, if you want to look at it at a percentage basis, 90 to 95% of your kids should get what they need in tier 1. Because again, if you're providing quality, effective instruction, 90% are going to get it right there. Let's assume you have about 10% though that don't. So what do they need? Well, one of the things that I feel pretty strongly about is that their intervention needs to occur during the school day. We're great about talking about after-school tutoring and all this other stuff, but in reality, particularly if you're working in a low socioeconomic school, a lot of our kids cannot stay after school because they have the buses, or they might be involved in extracurricular activities, or at the high school level, they've got work. There's a lot of barriers to that. So what I would suggest doing is during the classroom time, when you are dividing your kids out to do maybe some collaborative learning or whatever, that's when I would pull in that 10% of those kids and provide intensive instruction only on the skills that they need. We tend to try to reteach everything instead of doing that laser-like focus on the areas that are really the most challenging for our students. So really hone in and know by kid, here's the objective that they're missing. Here's the areas, so you have to get really diagnostic with this. It could be they're missing a foundational skill that's pretty simple to go back and remediate. It could be something else. but know and almost have that prescription for those kids and pull them out and do it during class time, during work time, etc. We also did lunchtime remediation period, so we'd pull the kids in, let them bring their lunches in, and we would do remediation during that time. About 10%, 5 to 10% of your kids are going to fall there. After that, if that still doesn't work, that's when you determine tier 3. A lot of people think that when you do a formative assessment, you group your kids. Here's my 90% that are fine, here's my 10% that aren't, and then here's my 3% or 2% or 1% that are really bad. In an ideal model and one that works most effectively, tier 1 is your good first instruction. Tier 2 is we've done some kind of remediation to fill in those gaps or to shore up those foundational skills they're missing. If we still have students that don't get it from there, those are the ones that move into tier 3. So it's a pretty small percentage. And for most of those students, most of my tier 3 kids usually were 2 to 3 years behind on grade level, etc. So you have an option. You can do one of two things. You can either continue that in-class remediation piece, but you've got to couple it with something else. Because these kids are so far behind, they need additional time and practice and support and lots of rich models. So for us, those were the students that we used, we had come to after-school tutoring as well as Saturday school. And I ran Saturday school every single Saturday. Literally the entire school year, unless it was, like a major holiday or something. But in that, we really became very, very diagnostic with the kids and tried to identify what were missing or skill gaps, what were conceptual misconceptions or problems. And we gave them it's almost like you triage them. It's probably the simplest way to put it. And then we tried to find the customized learning solution by student. Some kids, they needed it via computer. Some students needed to really spend some time with manipulatives in math. Some kids needed to really focus on specific literacy skills, etc. But that should be a pretty small number. Then even out of that group, if you've consistently seen for every objective and every assessment, certain kids are still not getting it, then whatever your process is in your district, I would be looking at a special education referral. But you have to make sure you've hit all those other tiers first and really provided that opportunity to learn. But sometimes you're going to have those very small percentages of kids who don't even get it after intensive tier 3 and move into special education. For those of you that may be familiar with Texas and Dallas ISD, Dallas is under sanctions from the state because of the way they've handled special ed. The whole state's in trouble with the feds because we were over-identifying kids. So one of the things that I think is critically important, though, is when you've gone through that intensive process of tier 1, 2, 3, and then if the kids are still not successful, you have plenty of documentation that really justifies the need for a referral. So not only is it best for the student, but it also protects the school from a liability sort of standpoint. Did I answer your question, Alicia?
Yes, thank you. I was just kind of trying to get an idea of, how many kids would fall into, that tier 2, and that how do you determine the tier 3, So if you have something that a majority of kids are not getting, you just do that in the classroom then, by reteach or, something like that, I guess, and then you do it through grouping with the other ones and things of that nature.
Yeah, one of the best teachers I've ever seen in my life, and if I can find it, I may have a videotape of how she did her groupings. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. It was absolutely seamless and flawless, and she did it so well. The kids, it'd be like she'd say, okay, it's time to move, and they automatically knew where to go, what to do, and it wasn't consistently like group A moves from point 1 to point 2. It was group A became group C, and they were all different members, and like I said, it was amazing. So if I can find that, her name was Mercy. If I can find the video, I will send that to you guys, because like I said, it was the best I've ever seen. She was our teacher of the year that year too for the whole district, so pretty amazing. Okay, what other questions do you guys have? Y'all are letting me off easy tonight. Okay, one last piece that I do want to talk to you about, and if you guys are kind of caught up with some of the readings and stuff, another part that I think is critical that a PLC engage in and does is not only the data analysis, the curriculum planning and unpacking of standards, the best practice and lesson planning and all of that. I think it's also critical that effective PLCs will step in and they will do classroom observations. So if I can get my screen to share, and we always know how good I am at this. Let's see. Yeah, actually, it's right here. Okay, let me pull you guys back up and do share screen. Where's my screen little thing? Hang on. Sorry, gotta move you up. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Okay, so I think this is it. Okay. All right, can y'all see this? It says classroom observation checklist. So one of the things that I know that we as a school district, this is when I was a principal in Dallas, we actually moved to doing a lot of peer-to-peer observation. And I'll give you a concrete example. I noticed in my math classrooms that the math teachers were having a really difficult time with student engagement. They were doing a lot of what I call teaching to the whiteboard or teaching to the overhead as opposed to teaching the children. And the kids were compliant because we had well-behaved students, but they really weren't engaged in the learning. And we had tried everything. We had done model lessons for them. We had done role playing. We had sent them to training. We'd watched videos. They just could not seem to get it. So we decided to do sort of an out-of-the-box idea. And we moved into peer-to-peer or classroom observations. We actually called ours classroom walkthroughs. They were completely non-evaluative, and we made that very clear from the beginning. But all we did was we would go in and we would have the teachers write down what they saw happening in the classroom. Pretty simple. You know, they were literally just scripting what was going on. So it may be something like, the teacher asked the students, what's the answer to number 4? You know, student A responded, blah, blah, blah. From that, we would then do hallway discussions where we talked about what we saw, and then we would have our wonderings or our questions about it. So things such as, I wonder why the teacher chose to have the students work independently during practice time as opposed to maybe having them work in groups. We didn't answer the questions, it was simply a wondering. Then from that, we took all of our observations across classes and grade levels and looked to see if there were patterns. So one of the things we noticed was that some of our content areas were much better at engaging students actively than others. So once we figured that out, we decided to take all of our math teachers to go observe my dance teachers. Now, I was the principal of a performing arts high school. You may have heard of Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in Dallas, or the Arts Magnet. And people thought I had lost my mind, including my teachers. They're like, why are you making us math teachers go watch the dance teachers? Well, if you've ever watched a dance teacher or a dance class, particularly a highly effective dance teacher, there is nothing but student engagement. You know, the teachers will do corrections with the students are all very actively involved. No one was allowed to opt out of the learning. So unlike in my math classroom where the teacher would teach to the board and then 1 or 2 students would respond, what they began to notice was in the dance classroom, everybody had to participate. And as opposed to the teacher being the one who was up there lecturing and demonstrating, the students were doing all of the movement, the demonstration, the learning, and all the teacher was doing was going around and facilitating that by providing very concrete feedback. And lo and behold, my math teachers, and I literally remember this moment. We went out in the hallway to do our discussion, and one of the teachers said, oh my gosh, I finally get it. She said, I see how I can take exactly their premise, not the same content, but their premise back into my classroom. So with that being said, that became a very critical element of our PLCs. So we held our PLCs once a week. This was, through agreement with our teachers. We held it once a week during their planning time, and we had common planning times by content. And so we would spend one of those periods doing walkthroughs. And it became the most helpful thing I think that we've ever done. Not only were we able to identify school-wide areas of need, we could pick out and see which students needed the most help and struggling. So in addition to those interventions in the classroom, we had a mentorship program. So as a principal, I had 10 students that I mentored. I met with them every Friday morning. I usually had lunch with them once or twice a week. And I started monitoring their grades and stuff. It was just kind of amazing. They were very capable students, but just having somebody watch their grades and the fact that I called their parents every week to update them on where they were, it made a huge, huge difference. So a lot of people wonder, well, how do you capture that information? I will tell you, this is not my favorite classroom observation checklist, but it's at least a place to start. So this one's very specific. It's divided into sub-areas. So organization, presentation, instructor-student rapport, clarity, etc. I will tell you honestly, this one works. I mean, you could use this. It's very specific, but I'm a fan of something much simpler. Ours was simply observations, and then you wrote in whatever you wanted that made sense to you as the observer. Then it was questions or wonderings. So what do you still want to know more about? And then the last part was one thing that I saw that I will take and use in my classroom. That was all we did in our observations. The teacher got a copy, we kept a copy, and a copy went to the principal or the assistant principal in charge of it. And what we did from that was we simply looked at overall what were we seeing. And so that became the foundation for our decisions about professional development. I told you student engagement was one we identified. Another one was that we noticed, and actually it was my teachers who brought this to my attention when we were doing this. They're like, we really don't know how to teach vocabulary. And lo and behold, that was one of our lowest areas on our statewide assessment and testing. And what we were seeing in the classroom was, on a Monday, here's your vocabulary list. On Tuesday, here's your homework. I want you to define all the words. On Wednesday, use it in a sentence. And then on Friday, we'd see the vocabulary quiz. And, we all know how effective that was, right? So the fact that we were going into each other's classrooms, and it wasn't a ding on anybody, it was just the realization that, oh my gosh, we really don't know how to do this very well. And so that became one of our big, huge professional development strands. And all of that came out of the PLC. The other part of the observation was that sometimes we would kind of change things up. So if they decided they wanted to see other math teachers, we would get a sub, and that sub would rotate, class by class, so that we could free up the teachers to go observe each other within their content area. Other times we would just, it's like the math teachers would go see dance, and then the next time they'd go see science, and and we just kept moving it around. There's not, as I said, a right or wrong way to do this, but it does help to, like I said, to really focus on not only what's going on in the school, to identify trends and areas of need, but it also gave us all a really good glimpse into our students. One of the other parts of it too, again, as a high school principal, we were somewhat amazed, not me, but some of the teachers were. Oh yeah, and Joanne, yes, I'll share my little very simple classroom observation tool with you. I thought I may have posted it already, but if not, I will for sure tomorrow. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where a student is just horrible for you, but they can go to another teacher and they're like the perfect angel. Some of my teachers who were struggling with particular kids saw them in a whole different light when they were in another teacher's classroom. So it really helped us to change our perceptions about some of our students, myself included, because we always made sure that there was at least one administrator who went with us on these walks. And like I said, again, it wasn't about evaluating each other. It was just understanding what was going on in the classrooms and being there as a true support system for each other. Another great outcome for us was I had a phenomenal English teacher, probably one of the best in the world, but she was very quiet. She just kind of kept to herself. She just went in her room and did great things and got great results. And I remember the first time I took a group in her classroom, and I walked out and they're like, oh my gosh, she's phenomenal. And I'm like, I've been telling everybody and nobody believed me. But it really changed everybody's perception of what was great teaching. And suddenly she became the go-to person. Like, well, how do you do this? And I noticed you did this with your kids. So like I said, PLCs, if you do the right stuff in them, they're powerful. They're very, very powerful. But unfortunately, too many people do a lot of things they call a PLC, but it's not really a PLC. So hopefully you're learning some tips, strategies, and tools that you can take back and teach them the right way to do it. Okay. Other questions? How are you guys feeling about the assignments? Like I said, the ones I've seen have been awesome.
I had a question about the assignment. It was the, let's see, planning an effective PLC. You posted it in 2 different modules. Do we need to submit something different for, or is that the same assignment? We just submit it once? Okay.
Yeah, you just submit it once, but I just put it up there again because sometimes people seem to have a hard time finding stuff if it's in, you know, we started the assignment in module whatever, but it's not due till, you know, module the next one or whatever. So I just put it in. Tiffy, did you have a question?
I had the same question.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, you guys are just making this easy on me tonight. I know you're going to be heartbroken if I let you go a few minutes early, right?
Okay. Oh, I did have one more thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think it's possible? Because I was looking, like when I click on, like on the profile and to view your grades, it gives a list of assignments, but a lot of stuff I click on, it like won't open. Can you give me like a definite list of what's left to do?
Yeah, it's going to vary a little bit for everybody. So just email me, Tiffy, and I'll be glad to look at yours and see what you've got missing or outstanding.
Thank you.
And another part of that too, guys, what I typically do is when I go into grade, even though I know that I've given everybody till March 3rd, though, this is for me, so don't freak out if it happens to you. I will give you a 0 and I'll put no submission. The only reason I do that is if you go in and look to see what maybe is a missing assignment or I see what I still need to grade, it doesn't show up. So if you get a 0, that is an indication you just haven't submitted yet, because that's why I write no submission. It's not your final grade, okay? So that's one way to do it. But yeah, Tiffy, just email me and I'll be glad to look and see what you're still outstanding on.
2 questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir.
Oh, sir, I'm sorry. I thought I'm looking at Joanne and I thought she was talking. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Earlier you were talking about the PLC and doing note cards and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Could you do a mind map with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's what I had started writing about in the one that I'm doing right now. Using a mind map. That way everybody can everybody can participate with using a mind map, and it shows the directions in which way you want to go. So I thought about that, and I didn't know if that was something that we could do or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, guys, there are a million tools out there for collaboration and discussion. I love the nominal group technique. That's one that I use all the time. I've used mind maps. I've used, if you're familiar with thinking maps, they have some great protocols, that also can be used for brainstorming. They're also great with students too, as graphic organizers, by the way. But yeah, anything you want to bring in, I think is fine as long as it works and accomplishes the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, there was another thing that you were talking about the students who aren't achieving well enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that brought back into my mind from watching the Annenberg learners in my reading content, where one of the well, one of the teachers would go through and walk through all of the students. And they would go through into their groups,
Mhm.
and they would get them situated and talk to each person, and each person had to talk back to her about what they know. And then she would get all of them started, and then one by one start addressing the students that needed reinforcement and enrichment and stuff like that. So that kind of brought back a little blast from the reading content course.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I've even seen preschool teachers who have done that very effectively, where they post the objective in a pictorial format for the students, so they know exactly what they're supposed to do, and then they do a lot of peer tutoring or peer teaching and things like that. So yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a million different ways to do this, but if you walked away from a PLC that's effective, you're going to feel pretty confident, hopefully, about the assessments that are being done and whether or not it will accurately measure where your kids are. Because if you don't have good, solid assessment data, guys, you're going to get what I call false positives. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, too, where, a school thought they were right on track and all that, but their assessment wasn't aligned to the curriculum, which wasn't aligned to the state assessment, and their instruction was out of whack. And even though their assessment results that they were getting on their formatives as well as summatives was pretty good, because it was so out of alignment with the rest, they were shocked when their scores came back and they were terrible. So that's why it's really important to spend time and energy in that professional learning community focused on those critical elements.
Yeah, I wished when I was teaching that more people came in and observed me, and I could go observe other educators. That was never afforded to me, and I think I kind of lost something there before I was asked to resign because I'm not a football coach. No offense to anybody. That's what that principal wanted, was another football coach. But that it would have been really nice if I got to see other people. He was the only one that ever came in and observed me, and always had a lot to write up. But I never got to go see anybody else, and nobody else ever came in to see me. So I think I lost a little bit there.
Yeah, and honestly, if a school is a real learning organization, there should be learning not only happening with students, but from teacher to teacher, teacher to leader, leader to leader, parent to leader. I mean, one of the things, we had a very, very robust observation system in place. I was difficult to work for, in the sense of I required my administrative team to do a minimum of 10 observations a week. Minimum. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but it is when you're in a high school and, your assistant principal has, discipline and textbooks and lockers and, 10,000 other things going on. But if we're going to be about instruction, that's what we had to do. We also, as I said, teachers observe teachers all the time. Now, I counted it as part of their professional development credit because we thought that was way better than the sit and get stuff that we've been doing. And quite honestly, we had much better results when we implemented that. We even had teachers who were willing to let parents come in and do parent observations. Now, we had a whole training and induction part before we allowed parents to do that. But it was pretty amazing, the feedback we got from parents. And then we trained students to do the same thing. And again, they were all looking from a different lens and a different perspective, but it was an important perspective. And, we were careful who we chose, and like I said, there was a very strong induction part. But it was pretty amazing, the kinds of things that we would hear from parents, we would get back from students, about what they were seeing in classrooms. And they were very, very astute. I was often surprised that some of our toughest teachers, considered the most rigorous and all that, had the highest evaluations from our parents and our students, because they realized how important it was to have rigor in the curriculum and in instruction. So yeah, I would absolutely, if you can encourage or develop that system or, help your principal to do those kind of things. Like I said, it really revolutionized our school. And we went from an average school to honestly one of the best in the state and one of the best in the country in a very short time period. We turned that within 2 years. And like I said, I attribute 90% of it to the work being done in professional learning communities and those peer-to-peer observations, as well as constant feedback loops. And not only, it's fair play, I had my teachers evaluate every one of us as administrators every month. It was done anonymously, and they were brutally honest that it made us much better. So like I said, just that idea that we're all about growth really can make a huge difference.
Yeah, today learning from each other is something great, and I always like to learn. One of the anesthesiologists called me in today and wanted me to look at something because we had a patient that had a cardiac arrest in the middle of a surgery, and they got him back, but we were using a machine that monitored the brain waves and monitored physiological things like blood pressure and the heart. Mm-hmm. And we were looking at this information, and I brought up the thing about the brain. He said everything occurred in the frontal lobe. Well, if your frontal lobe is injured, a lot of times your demeanor, how you think is distorted. But, that's why they used to do lobotomies. And everything physiologic came back within 2 minutes. But the brain did not come back. Everything in the brain did not come back for about 20 or 30 minutes. And he said it scared him, but we were talking about this, and I said, I wonder what her demeanor is right now. And he had never thought about that part. So this course has helped me because I can collaborate better with some of those guys and everything. That's kind of where I was coming from with that, about collaboration and learning from each other, whether it's the parent, because what patients have parents too, and you learn a lot from the parents from talking with them too about your patients if they're pediatrics. So it's all very helpful to me.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, guys, anything else for the good of the group?
I'll shut up.
No, you're fine. Just I don't want to keep you guys past our time. Okay, well, we've got our final Zoom meeting next week, and then don't forget, everything is due Saturday, a week from this Saturday. But like I said, most everybody's in really good shape, so just keep at it, and we'll get it finished up, and hopefully you'll be happy with the end results. So, thanks, everybody. Y'all have a great night. Turn off our recording here.